I'm Christina. Welcome to the Revolver Fan First podcast. We have a very special guest today. We have a legend of guitar music, of radical thought, introducing us to radical thought through violent and aggressive and excellent guitar music. Tom Morello.
Hello, how are you? It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you here. So now you grew up, you're the child of a rebel. You're a child of a rebel woman, if you will.
Yes, that is not inaccurate. A child of actually two rebels, though they didn't grow up in the same house. My dad was part of the anti-colonial movement in Kenya, overthrowing British colonialism. My mom was, from a small coal mining town in central Illinois that became just sort of a preacher of radical thought and standing up from farm workers to civil rights issues to anti-war issues to running a global organization called Parents for Rock and Rap to stand up against censorship. So my mom, Mary Morello, at 97 years old, remains the most popular and most radical member of the Morello family.
Well, she should really be running the place. Like, I don't really think anyone else is really qualified to be running the place.
Here.
Like,
she does, a few years ago, she moved here, and now, like, my studio is kind of underneath her house, so I'm literally playing in my mom's basement again.
It's Electric Sheep all over again.
It is.
Awesome.
She does have editorial comments about what it is that I play down there too.
Nothing's.
I will describe her comments as unsparing.
Well, she's got to be your biggest fan though, and you're probably her biggest fan. So
she's also a huge proponent of and she doesn't know what podcasts are, but she would want to listen to this podcast if she did know what podcasts were.
Awesome. Well, man, she's got 100 years. We'll get some Aboriginal Indigenous elders together, get them to start running things. We'll follow that. They've seen it all play out.
We could do a lot worse than that.
We really could. And so I'm curious. Okay, so she's introducing you to Ideal. She's introducing you to Martin Luther King. You're in a very racially one-way town in Libertyville. I read that there were 7 black people in 1960, which was before you were born. So that's
there was one. Let me just say that. It was according to the real estate agent, there was one, and it was me. That's how I would imagine you're looking for ways to feel like you belong. Yeah.
And what, she introduced you to Huey P. Newton, Black Panthers.
Yeah, it was, the thing was like you only have the experience that you have within your home. So I'm not conscious of the fact that not everyone's mom is talking about the Black Panthers and Cesar Chavez and this, and Che Guevara and this, that, and the other. I just sort of, it's not until you get to sort of the teenage years and high school, you're sort of discussing people's opinions about what's going on in the world, that I realized how starkly different my home life was to my friends and teachers and whatnot. But yeah, it was, looking for, first of all, I had a great group of friends from the time I was small, some of whom I'm still very close with today. But then for me, music was, when I really discovered rock and roll around 12 years old, that was when I was really all in finding a community beyond the borders of my town, and when you like the same band, you're friends with someone already,
Yeah, totally.
It sort of felt like that. And my connection, I didn't have any older brothers or anything. I was the only kid. So I found this music on my own. And a lot of my connection was through rock magazines,
Hey.
It was a huge, because there's no one no older brother handing me an album or something like that. Yep. It was basically, I liked Kiss and I liked Led Zeppelin. So if they were on the cover of a magazine, I'd buy that magazine and read about the other artists that were featured. So.
Excellent. So what was the first artist you put on a pedestal?
Well, that would be Kiss. That was really I bought the Kiss Destroyer album at the grocery store where it was at checkout, you get M&Ms or you get the National Enquirer or Kiss Destroyer. And as a fan of comic books, I remember my mom had the shopping cart, we were waiting in line, and I saw this. It was clearly an album, and it said Kiss, and it was my favorite band before I heard a note of music. I just sort of knew that this is my tribe. I'm now invested in this. And sure enough, it had a lot of kick-ass rock and roll on it as well.
Yeah. Oh, it was written in blood. Didn't they have a comic book written in blood?
They did later have a comic book where they put a vial of their blood in with the red ink.
Well, did you see heavy metal and radical ideas? When did they become something that could be experienced together? Because I would imagine
never the twain did meet. And for me, it was always sort of like I loved music, and I had this kind of set of ideas that were independent of one another.
Yeah.
And the band that kind of bridged that gap was not a heavy metal band, it was the Clash. And it was like sort of the first rock and roll band that like was powerful musically, but also contained a set of ideas that I could really relate to. And as much as I love metal, and I loved metal, but the lyrical content was not relatable. I mean, it was like my favorite metal band sung mostly about the devil and groupies, neither of which was a big part of my life. Between Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, and Wang Dang, Sweet Poon Tang, like none of that had any bearing.
No real, nothing in the heart right there. Yeah.
My daily existence, trying to get a job at the Dairy Queen and living in a damp basement with comic books. So I really sort of felt that those worlds might have to remain independent. And even as someone who then became like a guitar player, I loved the metal stuff so much, but there was no real example of music that was unapologetically kind of riff heavy and super heavy like that and also that relied on the kind of musicianship that I admired.
Totally.
But that had a content that felt like it made more sense to me.
Yeah, totally. Well, I have to admit, I have gone down a Clash rabbit hole preparing for this, because you did say you wrote your first political song after listening to London Calling.
I did.
So, lyrics, were you writing lyrics as well? Like what?
Yeah,
lyrics.
Absolutely.
I'm really interested in your relationship with lyrics, because I know you're first and foremost, you're a guitar player, but to say that the message isn't clearly a big part of who you are as a musician is.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, well, I appreciate the guitarist, sort of the guitar side of things. Guitars, like, it was a calling. I didn't really choose that chose me, but I've always kind of self-identified more as like an artist than as just a guitarist, And from my first punk rock band in high school, when I got the Clash record, I wrote a song called Salvador Death Squad Blues. Now this was sandwiched between songs Beat Me, Whip Me, Make Me Feel Cheap, and a song about Jackie Onassis.
That would have been challenging album artwork.
I'd say there was a spectrum of ideas that was represented in
it's rock and roll, baby. It does it all.
It's nice high school band, but it did plant the seed that there might be some overlap between shredded guitar playing and that, but that would only come later.
Well, it's exciting. I mean, he said so this guy Marshall McLuhan said the medium is the message, and that happened like the year you were born.
Yeah.
When you take that with rock and roll, is the medium the message? Or like, I'm kind of interested like the relationship between, because I feel like when I listened to Rage when I was a teenager, it was like I felt like the membrane was stretched more thinly to receive ideas. Like you get like into that kind of filthy kind of moment, you're more open-minded. Well, how do you think? Yeah,
absolutely. I wish I could say that was maybe sort of more by design, but it's certainly true that it's certainly like when music, or when any art, but when music in particular is compelling, then you're forced to contend with whatever the ideas are that ride along with that music. You know what I'm saying? And so whether it's songs about the devil and you're forced, or I love the Scorpions and their songs, the misogynist anthems, like those are the words that are in there that you're forced to contend with and agree with or disagree with, or sort of absorb as part of who you are, or distance yourself from. And so, I mean, the first and foremost, in order for a band to get over, you've got to be a great fucking rock and roll band. I mean, if you're not, there's not like a, like if you put a beat to a Noam Chomsky lecture, nobody wants that. You know what I'm saying? And that may be a more sort of insightful version of how to understand the world, but it doesn't have a kick-ass rhythm section, a compelling front man, and a crazy guitar solo that you can get with, regardless if you have any idea what's being talked about in the song. But they're still talking about it in the song, and that can then filter in through osmosis.
Was there a particular song that struck you that way the first time? Like, what was the first musical storyline you really got into?
Oh, that's interesting. The first musical storyline, well, the first metal one, there's two, was the Ballad of Dwight Fry, which was a Alice Cooper song, which was sort of a ruminations on a young man going insane, and I very much identified with Dwight Fry. Dwight Fry was the name. from the original Dracula. Dwight Frye was the person who like ate the flies and stuff like that. Anyway, so that was it. But then with sort of on a more conscious tip, it was the Sex Pistols' "God Save the Queen."
Yeah.
And it was just so interesting how they took a rock and roll song. They're guys from the UK who took a rock and roll song to disparage the monarchy, you know, because tourists are money, and like because she ain't no. And I was just like, wow, like that's something else to sing about, man. Like that.
Well, there's in the Clash doco, they're talking about seeing the Sex Pistols just going, oh, this changed everything.
Yeah, like that's something to sing about, man. Like, and you're kind of kicking my ass with that jam.
Yeah.
Thinking about that's something I didn't think people sang about. And
it's like Hendrix and the Star Spangled Banner. It's kind of like
exactly. Sort of a reimagining of what is possible is what happened with the Sex. For me, I loved rock and roll. I didn't start playing music until I got the Sex Pistols cassette, and it was Anarchy in the UK and God Save the Queen. I remember like bought the cassette, was in my mom's Honda Accord, going over to my friend's house. I listened to Anarchy in the UK and God Save the Queen. Again, I was just waiting. My friends must have been like, where the hell is he? And just like again and again and again and again. And I was like, within 24 hours of listening to those songs, I was in a band. I didn't know how to play a note on the guitar. I didn't know how to play a chord on the guitar. I went into the Libertyville High School Drama Club. That was my people, the drama club. And I said, this is the next afternoon, so within 24 hours, like a punk band is forming. I'm the guitarist, because I actually had a guitar in my closet. If you want to be in it, raise your hand. No experience required. You know.
You got Adam Jones. You got Adam Jones.
He joined a little bit later, but yes, he was in the draw. Yes,
I was gonna say if he's actually the first guy.
And one of those guys. No. He could actually play. It was like a guy who owned some drumsticks, a saxophone player, and a guy who wanted to be Mick Jagger. So
you got a sax player?
Had a sax player? They were the ones that raised their hands. I said like whatever.
I don't know if the Sex Pistols would have been okay with your sax solo, Tom.
I don't know about that. I think it was sort of a like, you know, whatever happens.
Whatever's going on. Yep. So this is a vivid moment. Like, so you did a cover of Highway to Hell on the new record that came out in, I think, 1979. You were what, like 15 years old?
That sounds right.
Do you remember this moment? Do you remember, like, what were you wearing as a 15-year-old kid?
Yeah, no, I didn't get that record till later. Like I was a huge fan of AC/DC, but my introduction came, I think, with Let There Be Rock. I'm not sure what order the records came in. But Let There Be Rock might have been before that. But anyway, I didn't know Highway to Hell until later. Okay, cool. And interestingly, Highway to Hell and AC/DC was very controversial in the town that I grew up. It was not only ethnically homogenous, it was also a town that was experiencing like sort of a born again revival during this time. And rock and roll was talked about openly in the hallways among kids about, you know, your soul is in peril if you go to the AC/DC concert. And there were all of these kind of youth. Each church had like a youth group that would have like a Christian rock band to try to lure you away from the highway to hell and more towards like the highway to the collection plate, you know. So that was a
oh, you're good. That was solid. That could have been. That's
and anyway, so but I do remember like that song and some of those Black Sabbath songs of being very like hot button topics. And but anyway, but it's, I think that the song Highway to Hell, one of the greatest rock and roll songs of all time, an anthem of just liberation. And how that came about was I was on tour with the E Street Band in 2015. And we were playing in Perth, Australia, the home of Bon Scott, and where there is literally a highway to hell. There's a stretch of highway known as the Highway to Hell, which Bon Scott traveled on when he was his small hometown outside of Perth. So like the pub where he and his mates got like wasted was called the Highway to Hell. Anyway, so I was wanting to pay my respects to Bon Scott, so I went to the graveyard in Perth in about 11 o'clock at night. I could not find his grave. You might be surprised to hear that the Bon Scott grave is not lit with an eternal flame or something. It's
a bonfire, a Joe Strummer style bonfire just nearby.
A bonfire, and and so in the middle of the night, I'm lost. I'm wandering around for about an hour, and out of the mist comes this like a motorbike in the cemetery in the middle of the night. And there's a fella on it with like a German World War II helmet, like a heavyset fella, and a t-shirt which reads, "I don't give a shit, but if I did, you're the one I'd give it to." And I'm like, that guy's going to know where Bon Scott's grave is. So I flag him down, and sure enough, he directs me to Bon Scott's grave. I pay my respects. Later that night in the hotel bar, I see Bruce. I'm like, do you think that there's a way that the E Street Band and AC/DC might overlap? And he's like, never really thought about that before, but I'll think about it tonight. So we began rehearsing Highway to Hell at sound checks, and then we found ourselves in this huge Melbourne soccer stadium. And Eddie Vedder happened to be in town. He was there on a solo tour, like an acoustic solo tour, and he was at the show, and a light bulb went off. I knocked on Bruce's dressing room door. I said, Bruce, we are in Australia, where AC/DC is king, where the song Highway to Hell is the unofficial national anthem of rock and roll liberation in this entire country. What if we open the show with Highway to Hell with Eddie Vedder? And he was like, that sounds like a good idea.
look, we're gonna take that on board, Morello. We'll take it on board. We'll take it to the
so we did, and it was an apex moment in the history of, like, if you think you've seen a crowd go ape shit, you haven't, unless you were there that night. Like, people lost their minds. So.
That's our holy music.
I mean, are you kidding me? Like, people lost their damn mind. So when I was finishing this record, the Atlas Underground Fire record, and with all these great young artists like Bring Me the Horizon and Mike Posner and Fantagram and Damian Marley and Chris Stapleton and Sama Abdul Hadi, and
she's badass.
Yeah, she's badass.
Today all are, but she is too.
Yeah. She is super. I'll have a story about her too. Yeah. But so I was thinking, I wanted to make a song with my rock brothers, and I reflected on that, back to that night, and there was just an unbelievable night of like molten hot, great rock.
Yeah.
And you know, Highway to Hell, one of the greatest rock and roll songs of all time, sung by two of the greatest rock and roll singers of all time, Bruce Springsteen and Eddie Vedder.
Well, it's a pretty good way to get right into that record. That nice second tune, like you're
here we are.
Strong. Yeah. Well, speaking, you've worked with a lot of really interesting singers, and obviously your longest tenure with two of the greatest vocalists who have ever walked the earth, like Zack Rocha and Chris Cornell. I mean, I don't think there have been many who have left such a mark on the planet, and obviously, and left in such a huge way. What, like, between the two of them, like, what did Chris bring to you? And, because surely you're a fan. What did Chris bring to you? When did he bring you things, and what did he need from you? Like, what was your relationship?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, because first of all, we were, I mean, I was a bandmate and a friend of Chris, but I never stopped being a fan. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, I was like, it was when I was on tour with my band Lockup before Rage Against the Machine. Wow. Like, when you're in the van, like, the rule is when you're in the van, when you're driving, you get to pick the music, and I would always pick like those early Soundgarden demos. And EPs and whatnot. And then, I really think we were talking about before, like, sort of like the lyrical content. I credit Chris Cornell, maybe two or three bands, Soundgarden, Jane's Addiction, maybe Living Color, they were bands that embraced all that was great about heavy metal on the musical sense, like the unapologetic, huge riffs, but the lyrics were intelligent, and they were relatable, and they were artistic, and they were poetic, and they had a life of their own. They weren't just sort of singing about chicks and the devil on top of some kick-ass riffs. It was like there was a nuance and depth of, like, you could get into them if you were a smart person too.
You could get into them if you were smart. That's a headline.
or not, but also it provided like a greater breadth for the genre. Like, I love metal and I loved poetry, and those guys, and Chris Cornell was one of the people that brought those things together, and 100%. In a way that was commercially successful at the top of the chart. So 100%. We all owe him a great debt for, I think, saving metal in a way. And that's
100%. Yeah.
Anyway, so when we were in a band together, like, his initial impetus was he had been the principal music writer in Soundgarden as well as the lyricist, and he was like, I don't want to write music. I want to concentrate on lyrics and melody, and you guys write music. And the thing that is one of his great gifts on top of his startlingly good looks and hair and eyes and talent, all this stuff, you're like, are you like magical? Like,
He is, like, you got to spend a lot of time. He was magical from over here, so up there.
magical? Like I'd be next to that guy, like, you're like a magical being.
Yeah.
Like, how are you just sort of tan? Like it's so
Okay, hey man, I'm with you all the way. Yeah.
Blessed in so many ways, and a lovely dude too. But anyway, he would but he had this ability to craft melody, like beautiful and ferocious melody out of the ether. And I remember we were making that first record with Rick Rubin. Rick's like, you don't understand how lucky you got. Like I work with this is Rick talking. I work with a ton of vocalists, and it's difficult to make a great melody. And this guy is just throwing them right, left, and center. Like you know, like a stone, you know, I am the highway, you know, no matter what we threw at him, the simplest chord progression or the most complicated heavy riff, he would just like, he'd just sit in a chair with a cigarette, just like, and just, you know, mouthing some melody, like, okay, that sounds like a great song right there. What next? I guess. You know?
What was the most magic moment for you? What was the most magic song then for you coming together in that way? Like something you kind of like.
Magic song that.
It's that magical thing.
That period where we first were writing together was so fertile because it was like everybody was really firing on all cylinders, and it was so exciting to go to rehearsal it was like a song or two a day at rehearsal, and just also hearing, you know, I'd know I would go home that night, I'd work on some chord progression or some guitar riff and thinking in my head like, tomorrow Chris Cornell is going to sing something over this thing. Chris Cornell.
I'm really happy you still get giddy about it too.
It's me, Chris Cornell. Like, I'm going to see him tomorrow. I'm going to see the eyes and the hair, and he's going to sing a song with this riff. It's pretty amazing. I
mean, he'll live forever. You know, at least he'll live forever on some level. Like, you know, I'm really grateful for music for that. Get to kind of spill, and I do actually have some more Chris Cornell related things about your new album, but just I'm going to do a brief side note to Zack.
Sure.
What about Zack? What did you guys give each other? What did you kind of bond on?
In my opinion, he's the greatest front man of all time. He's the punk 100%. Rock James Brown. There's no one in the history of Western music that has like the sort of the totality of like spiritual commitment on stage in the studio as that guy, and it's matched with a brilliant intellect, and he's a tremendous musician as well, and you know, and it's a really like unbelievable combination. Just feel fortunate to, you know, be in a band with him.
He kind of you guys kind of held the fire, like Joe Strummer, kind of combining the music of your sound and your, like, you know, like, well, like, you know, Strummer talking about like dub and reggae and that, and coming from sound system culture that was around them in London. You kind of came from like hip hop culture in the 80s and 90s. I mean, that was, you know, your culture in some ways. How do we go down that path? Like hip hop.
I mean, the cassette, I will tell you, like, it's interesting because like the music that was the cassettes that were sort of on, you know, our car stereos, you know, it was Bad Motorfinger. It was Nirvana's Never. I remember it was Zack and Tim. They're the first ones that played me Smells Like Teen Spirit in the parking lot. We listened to it 3 times in a row, moshing in the parking lot, going, "What the fuck?" You know? I mean, now everybody's heard that song a million times, and it's in, you know, a bunch of like Pixar movies and whatever. But the first time the needle dropped on that thing, man, like we lost our minds. That first Cypress Hill record was huge. You know, there was an Ice Cube record then. We were listening to Led Zeppelin, I think Houses of the Holy, you know, and you can hear like that, and Nirvana Bleach too was big, you know, like it was that sort of combination of punk fury and hip hop gravitas, and then big ass riffs.
Yet on the first Rage record, you say no samples, keyboards, or synthesizers used in the making of this recording. As people who listen to hip hop, okay, I've got to know, what were you listening to that you went, none of this? Like, well, no, that's a strong statement.
Well, for the first 10 years that I had played guitar, I was, you know, I've been practicing my 8 hours a day, putting my 10,000 hours, playing a bunch of scales, trying to sound like Randy Rhoads and Eddie Van Halen and Steve Roth, and you know, and then it was around the time of the beginning of Rage Against the Machine where I started to self-identify as the DJ in the band, and I looked at the instrument differently. I looked at the guitar less as a means of like, here's a way to noodle, and this is a way to create, like, this is a means of like self-creation. like I went from being a musician to being an artist, and I felt it. I felt the turn where I was practicing 8 hours a day, but I was practicing helicopter noises that I heard overhead, barking dogs in the yard, Star Wars zappers, like I was practicing. And you may not sound like those specific things, but you're not going to sound like Eddie Van Halen if that's what you're practicing 8 hours a day. And all of a sudden it felt like it wasn't just a new vocabulary, it was a new language to be able to talk in and write in on the instrument. That, from that day, over the course of the next 30 years, that's the language that I've been kind of, messing about with.
Do you see any other people out there who are fluent in it? Do you see any other people who speak that language with you? Or
I mean, I suppose there's some people that have an accent a little bit, but it's, you did,
that makes a lot of sense, because honestly, it's really hard to have an original guitar sound. Like it is really, there is a lot of guitarists out there, and there's a lot of YouTube tutorials, and there is a lot of replication out there. And that's interesting you say that, because if you do listen to Rage Against the Machine in particular, it doesn't sound like anything else.
The hope with from that moment to this, and particularly on the Alice Underground record, is that I believe that the electric guitar is the greatest instrument invented by humankind, and that's not I look at that as sort of an objective statement rather than a subjective one, because like from the nuance of a Segovia classical piece to Metallica destroying a stadium with Hit the Lights, like there's nothing that has that kind of spectrum of of artistic possibilities. But I also believe that the electric guitar, I want the electric guitar to have a future, not just a past. And that's why I make these records. And the idea is that like guitarists tend to be mired in traditionalism, and and it's like, I mean, that sounds, and all that traditional guitar playing sounds great. I love it because it's guitar playing. But is there a way for guitar to really matter now and in the future, in a world of, I don't know, it's TikTok and this, that, and the other? And so by sort of submerging, on the one hand, being uncompromising in the kick-assness of the guitar, never compromise, make sure that there's big fat riffs that kick everybody's ass, make sure that there's guitar solos that people will never figure out or be able to put into tablature, no matter how hard they try. But having done that, I try to submerge myself into, like, with artists that seem outside of the, I'm not making like a bunch of records with people from rock rap bands, you know what I'm saying? I want a Palestinian DJ, and I want a country and Western superstar, and I want, an EDM dubstep up and coming artist, and I want Grandson, and I want Phanogram with some eerie electro spookiness, and see, where does that bring my guitar? You know what I mean? Like, that's where the future is, that's
speaking the language with new species. You're speaking the language, you're finding new species to speak the language with. Well, I thought it'd be interesting, because there is some you got a big filthy dubstep drop in there. You like a filthy big drop, and you love a capital S song.
I love it, man. I love it. I love the idea of, like, I was always one of those, prior to the first Alice Underground record, I was one of those guys that I just hated electronic music. To me, I had this sort of prejudicial view that it was only like stuff that you'd hear like in an Italian taxi cab. Like, this is
that is so
killing
Did you
me.
have a Joe Strummer moment? Joe Strummer took ecstasy at 42.
I was in the studio with an engineer guy, keyboard player, friend of mine, whose name is the Bull Shark, and I said to the Bull, he's like younger and has the haircut and all, and I'm like, play me 6 things that I've never heard before that you think I might like. And he played me Knife Party, and he played me Bass Nectar, and he played me this Skrillex track. And what I heard in that music was, I said, these guys all have to be Rage Against the Machine and Audioslave fans. I heard like the tension and the heaviness that there's not a guitar in sight. And so then I reached out to those guys, and sure enough, that happened to be the case. But I was like, what if we take the sensibilities of this music, which is made digitally, and we take the sensibilities of that kind of production, but we replace all of the moving parts with my Marshall half stack and my bare hands. And like, what's that? And that, to me, that's what these records are. It's a way of making this alloy of the big bass drops and the Marshall stack firepower.
Well, it's a pretty interesting combination. And I have to say, I did wonder what your moment was where it crossed over. Because Strummer had that moment where he's like, I don't get electronic music. I get it. This is a hotbed.
It was that moment. It was really, I
Yeah.
could tell you a song too. It was Knife Party Centipede when he put
That's
on
some cool. There's some really cool shit. There was a really cool underground scene here in Sydney for a long time. Bloody Fist Records, System Corrupt, which was basically punk, way more punk rock than what I knew. Like when Green Day was a big thing, and like I was like, that's not punk enough. This was like throwing a shopping trolley downstairs, like that kind of stuff, and that is fun to listen to. So, okay, I've got to ask you on the new solo album, right? So you've got this trio of songs that are all about darkness and demons and going inwards. Like you get the party started about, okay, funnily enough, about the escapism of partying, which most of us haven't had the opportunity to do. You've got Driving to Texas, Don't Wake Me Up, The War Inside, So High I Can Hear the Angels Cry, demons, drugs, darkness. Where is this coming from? You don't seem like
it came. I mean, this record was as much a, you know, antidepressant as it was a creative endeavor, you know, and it was in order for music to resonate, it needs to be authentic. And this was a dark time, and I didn't want to like, you know, pretend like that wasn't the case. There's three kinds of songs on this record. One is the songs that accurately reflect the feelings during that time. Let's get the Bring Me the Horizon song, which is a jam, and you can take on the surface value is like, let's go crazy. It's really about like when you're confronted with a, you know, a mountain of anxiety, you can party yourself to death. That's what that song's about. The War Inside with Chris Stapleton, you know, he and I got on a Zoom call to write a song. We ended up talking for 2 hours about how hard it was just trying to keep our families alive and sane, you know. And then what toll does that take on you? And do you find solace in the liquor cabinet, or what, you know, like what is the, and so that, you know, and then
it's blues. It's straight up blues, man.
Exactly. And then Driving to Texas, like we and Naraka too, like we were like, let's like how dark can we go? You know, like how dark can we go? Like Naraka is the Hindu word for hell, and and Mike Posner recorded vocals for that song while he was summiting Mount Everest. He recorded vocals for that song at 20,000 feet above sea level. I'm not sure how many meters that is, but anyway, so there was a leaning into the authenticity of the times, and like it is a time of anxiety, of isolation, of desperation, of depression, but there's music and there's connection, and there's this global connection with these musicians, and there's a shared experience that we can share through this as well. Then there's like the political songs. There's, you know, the Damian Marley on the Achilles List, and Grandson on Hold the Line, which are, you know, like they're anthems of now and of street fighting and of, you know, from Jamaica to Sunset Boulevard, of, you know, of standing up against injustice. But importantly, the third category are the instrumental songs on the record. And there, you know, from the record starts with a song called Harlem Hellfighter, and it ends with a song called On the Shore of Eternity, and in the middle there's a song called Charmed, I'm Sure, which features 3 generations of Morellos on that one.
Nice.
My mom and my kids. But the instrumental songs, it was important to just assert during a time where I wasn't sure who I was. It's like, it's a matter of self-creation. It's like, I'm just going to will it. I'm a musician. I'm a guitar player. Here it is. Like, I can play guitar like this, and I'm going to do it. There's going to be no words. We don't need to explain anything on this song other than that I'm going to kick your ass with this.
And express that for like 30 years, dude. You've been saying that.
Yeah. But I mean, it really felt like liberating in a way where my days were mostly filled with, you know, fixing plumbing accidents and broken windows, and, you know, dogs, you know, mending a dog's broken leg. Like we didn't, you know, we were locked down here for real. And then kind of going like, I still am a guitar player, and this is what I can do.
Well, it's beautiful. Like, I've got to ask, there's this great quote from Huey P. Newton, who said, while life will always be filled with sound and fury, it can be more than a tale signifying nothing. Looking back on your life, which has undeniably been filled with sound and fury, what to you is the most significant tale you've told? Just a nice small question.
Nice small question. Nice. Well, I mean, I would say there's 2. There's the overarching theme of every one of those 21 records, at least from my point of view, is that the world is not going to change itself. That's up to you. And that means you, like not somebody else, it's you. And whenever the world has changed, whenever the planet has become more decent, whenever it's become more humane, it's been changed by people who are no different than you. They've had no more power, influence, money, courage, creativity, ingenuity than the people listening to this right now. They stood up in their place in time, period. We are agents of history. And like, you have your hand on the steering wheel of history. You can ignore that and let somebody else drive it into the ditch, or you can wrest that wheel away from those sons of bitches and make it a better place. So that's the that's the one ongoing thread.
Well, that's an important thing. Okay, final. What is your musical Mount Rushmore? Who are the faces on it?
Oh dear me. Just off the top of my head, because you don't hold me to this, I reserve the right to change this another time.
Yes.
I'm going to go Jimmy Page, Joe Strummer, Bob Marley.
Okay, Bob Marley, real quick. Have you ever hung out with the Marleys? Have you ever had like a Kumbaya sing-along with the Marleys?
I did a song with Damian on this.
Yeah, of course you did. But did you guys used to hang? Have you guys hung out with
Ziggy's a dad? Our kids are classmates at school.
I had this real feeling you guys have spent some time with the Marleys.
I love all the Marleys are so funny. I remember we've jammed together a bunch of times. Like I'll go to like the show, but it's really funny because like there's a smoking culture and there's a different stuff which I'm not sort of a part of. Yeah. So I always show up and I'm like, hey guys, how's it going? And plug in my guitar and like everybody's like, hi, a lot of smoking. When it comes time, like I play the guitar solo, everybody goes like, oh.
I have this vision of you guys hanging out. Like, yeah. Actually, can we just go quickly? Yeah, the Damian Marley thing, just real quick.
Yeah. So Damian, I love Damian. I love all the Marleys, and Ziggy's my bro, and Damian.
Lauryn Hill?
What's that?
Lauryn Hill? She's involved in the
I'm a fan of Lauryn Hill. I don't know Lauryn Hill. But Damian, I'm a big fan of his work, and like his political voice is one that I think is very important. It's got like this, it's got a lot of his father in it, and it's uncompromising in a way like he appears on some like pop records and stuff, but he's hard, and I like that, so but that song, The Achilles List, the title comes from a line from one of those 1970s Planet of the Apes movies, Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, where it's the movie where the apes are like the slave caste and the humans are kind of mean fascists and they keep them down and make them work for them. But the humans keep a list called the Achilles List of the servants who might possess sort of the intellect or the ability to strike them in their Achilles heel and perhaps bring down the entire society. And so I always thought the Achilles List would be a list that I'd like to be on. Well,
I think so. I mean, it sounds hopeful from what you're saying with changing things. Can we change things? Can we get off the trajectory we're on, do you think? Really?
Well, I mean, it's the only answer to that question is, are you willing to do it? While it does seem to be daunting, like there's really kind of no other choice. Like our planet is in jeopardy right now, you know what I mean? And whether our children and grandchildren have a habitable civilization will be due to our action or inaction. Now, you know what I mean? But the reason why there is hope and the reason why there is optimism is that like things that in the past have been awful and seemed unchangeable, from slavery to women not having the right to vote to the Berlin Wall to apartheid, all that, those were things that felt like they were fixed in stone, that you were born with them and you were going to die with them. And that's not the case, but they were changed by real people who are no different than people listening now. That's the one lesson of history is shit changes when you change it.
Yeah. Well, that's a beautiful message and a great thing. I'm glad that music chose you. Thanks for that. I just
weird, sometimes I think like, what have I I love playing guitar, but there's like,
on a very personal note, my mates in high school used to play Rage Against the Machine covers, and after they played a particularly incendiary set, we had an assembly and got told not to have anti-establishment thoughts. That really happened. It was the greatest thing that ever happened to all of us.
Yes.
I will just say that we never stopped having anti-establishment thoughts.
Well, I mean, if you hadn't had anti-establishment thoughts before that speech that they
probably
gave
wouldn't have played the tunes.
You certainly had them afterwards. You certainly
100%. That was the thing. So thank you for being the gateway drug for all of us, and thank you for joining us for the Revolver Fan First podcast. Keep being right as hell.
A real pleasure. Death to false metal.